Good morning, guys. I decided to I usually do, as you guys know, I usually do live videos. But I think I wanted to do more of a contemplation as I walk type of thing. So my thoughts today are on a very important topic, a topic that me and Trey briefly touched upon when I was having my interview with him recently, and I made this comment about he was talking about how he believed that Christianity was the holder of these all these truths, and I made the comment that basically all religions make this claim of being this universal holder of the truth. So, and then I know that I briefly made a weak, you could say a weak rebuttal. I don't even say a weak rebuttal, but I tried to make a point about predisposition. But I think I wanted to kind of elaborate more on what I meant by predisposition, because I started thinking about how it sounded more like I was making kind of like this relative point, like, oh, it's just based on, sort of our personal preferences or capacities. But I want to elaborate that what I mean by spiritual disposition, what I mean by disposition is a spiritual disposition. That's what I am referring to, a spiritual disposition, our spiritual capacities. Now, there was a point in time where I read most of the introduction to Hegel by Alexander Kojeve. I believe I pronounced the first part right. I don't know. Kojeve. Where he says that time is man. Now, this alone is going to be sort of my probably unqualified interpretation of time as man, but I thought it would be interesting to incorporate time as man plus predisposition. Now, what's interesting when we kind of study across the variety of religions, and the perennial philosophy is very adamant about noting religions that have lasted for a long time. So we're talking like ancient traditions, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, I believe even certain African religions and Indian religions as well. So this is a very important point to take account of when we consider what do the perennialists mean when they talk about specific religions, and the specificity of this is exactly these traditions. Ironically, there have been some proponents of the perennial philosophy that sort of fall under, we could call it, they fall under like a traditional school, and they've created some type of criteria to determine what they define as traditional religion. But the topic of this talk is not going into that. The topic of this talk is obviously basically metaphysics and predispositions, but how do we count? So my example would be Kojeve's notion of time is man, man is time. And if we add predisposition onto it, something that kind of resonates with the perennial philosophy is that man himself seems to reflect, when it receives revelation, seems to reflect only himself. But the paradox of that is that when man reflects himself, he reflects an aspect of the other, meaning he reflects an aspect of the absolute, the Godhead, the divine, or the divine ground. And I thought what would be interesting to take account of a more particular subject. For example, there's many notions of time, or many or many metaphysical kind of theories about time and the way it sort of functions, or the way it should play its role in humankind. Now, if we take Kojeve's just very simple statement of time is man, and then we add the element predisposition, my sort of reflection on this idea is that time is essentially only you could say a product of this time. Let me rephrase this, okay? Time would be an elementary property of man's predisposition. So that means when man receives some kind of revelation, it can only reflect himself under that specific divine's aspect, which would account for a multiplicity and difference of notions of time. For example, even when we talk about Nietzsche, for example, his idea of the eternal recurrence, even Hinduism, for example, this idea of cyclical time, reincarnation, and everything else. There's even, there is something to be said about even the idea that we have kind of resulted time to just a mere linear and sequential notion, right? It's just time as utility. That is something else to be said, and I think there is perhaps a more broad cultural influence on this. And I think when we talk about predisposition, there is something to be said with time as nature and time as nurture on the influence of man. But I think when we look at religion, it is it's probably I would say this, time as time as predisposition, time as man, as revelation would reveal it, would perhaps be the most pure in that sense, but it would take man himself to do the work to realize that, to sort of what Aldous Huxley would say, kind of fall into the time of eternity. But even the time of eternity, time as eternity, or we could say, because this can get all very confusing, and I know my thoughts are a little bit muddled, but hopefully you guys can, have some patience. I'm trying to sort out these thoughts as I'm telling you guys about my reflections and speculation about this. But I will try to do, hopefully, a summary, a little bit more like Barney style, on what I'm really trying to say here. So just, bear with me. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that time is man. Time as this elementary proposition in property in man's disposition. We can see that if we carry the idea of not only is there predisposition, but within man's predisposition there is what we would call spiritual capacity. And so spiritual capacity is relative to man's notion of time. And if we all take in consideration that man's spiritual capacity is in a variety of degrees, some higher and lower than others, this could reflect what time is in itself and the way time is interpreted. Because time is man, is a very useful and universal concept to share how we interpret time, as basically the way man interprets time as is a reflection of his spiritual knowledge and capacity. So going back to what I had said earlier about this idea that now time has been reduced to basically, linear and sort of sequential, we can see here that, probably from a spiritual or theological standpoint, that man reflects his spiritual ignorance, right? And this would reflect through his self a time that is only utility, a time that is only, again, sequential and linear. But I believe that this simple statement by Kojeve, which is so important, can account for, again, the multiplicity of interpretations of time. Why is it that in Hindu theology there is a certain notion of time? Why is it in Buddhism there's a certain notion of time? Even if, for example, one claims no time, even the idea that there's only present time would also reflect the predisposition of the self, and according to his point in his spiritual capacity, right? And I'm only making this case to show that now, to make a more tangible example, and the only reason why I'm talking about time, and I'm not an expert about all the theories of time, but I have a very broad, kind of introduction to the theories of time, is that we understand, the only point that I want to make is that ultimately what is interesting about man himself is that man can only reflect himself. Now, when I say that man can only reflect himself, I mean man can only reflect his true self. But to a degree, man can also reflect his, man only sort of understands his false self. So there is that type of... Okay, so now that I've sort of elaborated on that point about how we can look at time as man, as a sort of, I don't want to take it as a full predisposition, but that is something that I will have to consider a little bit more later on. But time as a property of man's disposition, so we can account for a little bit more of man's predisposition, which I have included as, for example, another property of man's predisposition would be his spiritual capacity. So I'm adding two elements to man's predisposition: his spiritual capacity and his, and time. And another property would be his capacity to reflect reality, an aspect of reality. So it would be like, essentially, it would be like a sort of perspectivism, like if everybody sort of took pictures of the same thing, but we all got different angles. People were somehow lower on the ground due to their height. Some people got a higher ground picture because they're taller, and so on. There's just, some people got a better picture because they were closer. Some people could only get a very broad outline because they're farther away. this is exactly what I'm trying to reflect here about when we talk about time. And what I talk about spiritual capacity. This is a more, you could say, empirical example of what I'm trying to tell you. And what I mean by aspects of the divine ground. Now, what is perhaps more interesting, and the whole reason why I decided to talk about time and predisposition, is that we must consider the philosophical problem of metaphysics plus predisposition. And of course, everything, and of course the problem with philosophy is that even what I am saying, the idea of predisposition is a philosophy in itself, right? So I'm already adding a multiplicity of speculations, and then trying to tell you about philosophy and saying, well, philosophy can only reflect to a degree someone's predisposition. But how do we think? And then, of course, the problem would arise if man only reflects reality according to his predisposition. Then why is it that man himself wants to go through some type of unity with, sort of solve the problems of mankind through some type of universalization of, a problem? And I think that is also a property of man's disposition, that ultimately man himself concerns himself because there is a problem, and that unity, in whatever fashion that he approaches it, is the way that he wants to solve it. Like, for example, even though there are disagreements between political parties, the overall approach is that we want a better world, right? We want a more, I'll just leave it there. We want a better world. We want, better relations with each other. Unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, we disagree on the approaches. And what I'm saying is those approaches are based on, you could say, predisposition. But I don't want to reduce this to sort of like ego psychology. I think that would be a sort of entry point to understand what I'm trying to say. But ego psychology is not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is spiritual disposition, which is something that isn't talked about as often, and your spiritual capacity, and just to kind of elaborate, what do I mean by spiritual capacity? What I mean by spiritual capacity is that spiritual capacity would limit your knowledge to a certain degree of understanding the divine aspect, the divine reality, and that limitation, that limits, those limits between the lower and the higher, right? Meaning the higher being your full actuality of your spiritual capacity, would result in you knowing only an aspect of the divine. But again, the whole point that I was trying to make is that it is a real problem. It is a real problem to consider when we talk about metaphysics and predisposition. It can, I think probably the most wonderful examples that we can make of is like, why is it that, Freudian and Jungians have a sort of, why is it that some of them can't agree or, even refuse to agree with their world outlook? Again, this, you could say, is based on some type of predisposition, but it seems almost too reductive to say that. But I don't think that it necessarily is reductive in that sense. But I think we could go more into it, and there's many problems that would arise if we consider metaphysical theory reflections of our predisposition. For example, in a lot of the theological debates, right, materialism is highly despised, right? But you can understand that the reason why theologians despise materialism is because materialism reflects man's depravity, right? You could say man's poor soul, right? His fallen state. It reflects his spiritual ignorance. But you can see that man's spiritual ignorance has constructed a whole sort of metaphysical reality, right? What we call materialism, or some type of ideology like capitalism, and so on. So there is something to be said about that. But also, what is sort of ironic within man's, I think, what sort of prevents us from being super reductive is that man's predisposition also carries the capacity to mimic, which and assimilate. So because of his ignorance, he can sort of just fall under without really understanding the metaphysical reality that has been reflected, right? Or that has maybe been carried on by years of history. But again, I think for the most part I've elaborated on the problem that I am presenting. I think this would be a real problem to sort of think through and consider, where the predisposition itself is not necessarily limiting, is not simply relative. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that it's ironic that if we just look at man himself, man carries within himself the relative and the absolute. And it's this uncovering of the relative that man must go through. You could say his spiritual capacity to obtain something absolute, but at the same time, that absolute is only going to be relative to his spiritual capacity. But again, if we're talking about real world problems and not just spiritual problems, is that if he were to uncover his full spiritual capacity, he would be able to sort of come up with a solution, an answer to man's problem in, you could say, just to kind of use the more linear notion of time, man's problem in real time, in history. And so here we can understand that his uncovering of the particular absolute would help in a universal solution, would help him participate in a universal solution or understanding of problems. But hope all of you understood that. Take care.